Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a modern campaign agency dedicated to using data-driven grassroots, organising to build winning campaigns and make the world a better place. Whether you're in business, issue-based campaigns, or an organisation driving change in your community, Dunn Street develops strategies to overcome challenges by connecting people that share the same values and organises them to achieve common goals from the ground up. To find out how Dunn Street can partner with you, hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Hello and welcome to episode 16 of Socially Democratic, your favourite centre-left political and cultural podcast that will dive into the progressive issues of the day and the people who lead them from both home and abroad. And on today's episode, we are joined by the Shadow Minister for Health, Chris Bowen, who was down in Melbourne, most likely queuing for tickets for GWS versus the Footscray Bulldogs this weekend. Chris and I had a bit of a chat about a whole lot of things, actually. We had an agenda and then kind of didn't stick to it. But look, we talked a bit about the most recent federal election and get his thoughts on that. We talked a little bit about Queensland. We had a bit of chat about New South Wales Labor. He's a politics nerd and a campaign politics nerd, so we actually talked a little bit about past US presidential elections. We talked a little bit about the UK political scene. Had a bit of a broad conversation about the sort of social democratic coalition in Australia and how that's sort of faring and what that means for us going forward, which I kind of enjoyed. And then we just sort of talked about podcasts and footy and a whole bunch of other things. It was a good episode. Great to have him on. I always appreciate his thoughts. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Look, I will say that we recorded the episode whilst there was a construction site going on below the Dunn Street offices. So I tried to cut out as much of that background noise as I possibly could, but I do apologise if you hear some banging going on. But, you know, it's very working class, right? It's just, you know, with the Dunn Street, we're doing podcasts, we're amongst the workers. It's very socially democratic. And it's a bit of ambience. Look at it that way. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast via Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Stitcher. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review and a rating. Thank you for everyone who's been doing that. I really appreciate that. Helps the podcast get a bigger audience and promotes the show going forward. And obviously, don't forget to follow us on the various social media platforms for Dunn Street. So Dunn Street's on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Let's get to today's episode. Okay, we're taping this one on a Wednesday morning in downtown Melbourne, and we are joined by the Shadow Minister for Health and long-time listener, first-time caller, Chris Bowen. How are you?
All right. I'm good, Stephen. How are you, mate?
I'm very well. You and I did a podcast when I was back in the Victorian branch of the Labor Party a while ago. And you're a avid podcast listener, and you and I talked about that. And right off the bat, I actually want to get an update from you about the podcasts that you've actually been listening to lately. Are you still sticking with the West Wing one? Is that still going?
Absolutely, it's still going. It's a staple. For those who aren't aware of it, it's two guys, including Joshua Molina, who played Will Bailey, who on a weekly basis discuss an episode of the West Wing, you know, in seriatim. So it sounds maybe to some people boring. It is absolutely magnificent. And, you know, they do things like delve into issues which are raised in episodes of the West Wing, and they might get an expert on in the field on, say, Veterans Affairs or, you know, whatever the issue is that's being traversed in the West Wing. So, yeah, I'm still with that. It's drawing to an end.
I was going to say, it's how many seasons were there?
Seven, and they're in the seventh season now. So okay. It's not long to go, but you can start from the beginning if you've missed out and catch up. I've just got onto, just very recently, a new podcast. It's new to me. It's been around a while, called The Dollop. You're nodding away.
Conrad French, who was my co-conspirator at Pot on the Hill, is I think he's got shares in The Dollop. He would be on to me constantly about listening to that.
Well, he didn't get me onto it, but somebody else did, and I sort of wasn't sure, and I completely love it. It's two comedians, one who researches an episode from US history, and the other one who doesn't know what they're talking about until he sits in front of the microphone and, just like wouldn't know even when the conversation starts. And it is amazing. It's I've listened to 2 episodes, one on Lyndon LaRouche and one on this college in America for the deaf, and how they didn't have a deaf president of the college for 170 years or something, and how that happened. And it's actually educative. It's informative and it's very funny. So I strongly recommend the dollop.
It's quite a unique concept, I thought, when they first came up with it, because they do pick obscure moments in history.
Yeah, obscure moments in history, but interesting. And some of the stuff is just hilarious. Bit of a language warning, they take it for a spin, but it's hilarious.
They do. And also Friends of Australia as well. The guys come out to Australia quite a bit for the various comedy festivals.
Yeah, they've done live shows in Australia, and unfortunately I didn't get onto it until, after the event. But if they come back, I'll be looking to go. It's, really, really good. So, they're probably, they're turning sort of the staples, the Axe-Files, and obviously at the moment a lot of British political podcasts.
I actually don't have any decent Brit podcasts, and because there's so much going on in the UK at the moment, which we'll talk a bit about later on. Which ones can you recommend?
There's the Times one, and there's I'm just getting them up so I can give you the exact titles, because there's the. Where are we? Oh, Reasons to be Cheerful. I think we talked about that before. That's Ed Miliband's podcast. That's great.
That is a good podcast.
I enjoy that. Talking Politics, which is David Runciman. That was the one the name just escaped me. He's good. He gets people on, which is interesting. And the New Statesman I listen to. And there we go. Socially Democratic. There it is.
Make sure you leave a review.
That's right.
Actually,
that's right. And Political Thinking with Nick Robinson, which is a BBC one, which is great.
You know what? Let's talk about British politics. I'm just going to throw the agenda out the window here, like any good branch meeting.
Absolutely.
Because we've had a couple of people on in previous weeks. We had Richard Angel on, who was a former director of Progress, and we were sort of talking about anti-Semitism within the party. Right off the bat, in the early days, we had John McTiernan on, who's obviously a friend of the Labor Party over here. First of all, before we move into Brexit, your thoughts on the Labor Party and where it's going in the UK, and just observing from afar. How are they? Their numbers are falling in the polls. I know polls aren't always accurate, and they had predicted that they weren't going to be that great at the last election as well, and turned out to be quite a decent result for Corbyn. But with all of the shit that's going on in British politics right now, with Brexit and all the things that are flowing off the back of that disaster of a truck, surely Labor should be doing better in the polls than they are right now.
Objectively, I mean, I guess you could say it's easy for us on the other side of the world, having just lost an election ourselves, but, given you asked the question, government has been so bad, this Tory government in Britain has been so bad, the Labor Party should be 20 points in front. This is a government which has endangered the Union, enlivens Scottish independence again. It's a mess on the island of Ireland. Called a referendum, to manage internal politics, and then
which is the unique approach.
Yeah, couldn't, not knowing the result, and couldn't convince the people as the government of the day of the benefits of staying in Europe. A 40-year project. So that, the Tory government should be, miles behind, and on most evidence is in front. And while we're not meant to talk about overseas politics, Boris Johnson is a volatile character. The world in which he's Prime Minister of the UK is not one that many of us could have predicted. And yet, it could well be that they hold an election later in the year and win it. I think the British Labor Party has some, obviously some very great thinking to do, as do, in fairness to them, as do parties of the progressive left around the world, us included.
Yeah. October 31 is the date that is in my diary, and anything can happen before that. If a week's a long time in politics, then October 31 feels like a lifetime away. But when I was in Ireland at the start of the year, it was just fascinating to see the press coverage in the Republic about Brexit. It is dictating their thoughts about where they are in terms of their relationship with Britain, where their relationship is with Europe. The talk about the backstop, all of that kind of stuff. It's been fascinating to watch.
It's a huge issue for Ireland because the hard border is unthinkable. A return to the hard border with all these sort of obvious economic and practical implications, but also the cultural and historic implications. 20 years after the Good Friday Agreement, are going back to a hard border, which is quite unthinkable. I think it's conceivable that we are talking about the reunification of Ireland. Certainly in our lifetime, and maybe earlier on in our lifetime. If the reason for the partition has effectively disappeared through the Good Friday Agreement, and now it's got 20 years behind it, so it's clear that it's a going concern, and it's very difficult to see return to the pre-Good Friday troubles. And if the Republic is in Europe and the UK is not, and therefore Northern Ireland is not, and they're right next to each other, and it's just hugely practically difficult. If you're an Irish politician on either side of the border, you'd be seriously thinking about, I think, reunifying the Republic and Northern Ireland. I'd be surprised if that debate or that issue goes away, because I would have thought it's a conceivable, practical way of dealing with the challenge thrown up by Brexit for the Irish.
Yeah, and voters always are pretty pragmatic as well. And I know that the North is a unique political environment, but even when we were in Belfast and we were talking to people who traditionally vote unionist, were saying that our leadership is out of touch with our views. They're going in and negotiating in Westminster to maintain the Union of Britain, but also to remove themselves from the Union of Europe. Whereas our thoughts are, we're all about the Union of Britain, because that's fundamentally who we are. We are unionists, but actually Europe is actually more important to us because it's an economic security that we don't have.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's a very reasonable and practical position to take, especially, as I said, given the sort of distrust of the Republic and the sort of religious divide is much less of an issue than it was 25 years ago.
Let's come home for a moment. You've had a bit of time to reflect on the federal election that was held in earlier this year. At the time, you said that it was a work in progress to determine how much the election result was a backlash against the policies and how much of it was a result of poor campaign decisions, broadly speaking. I'm not quoting you there, but so it's been 3 months since then. Have you had time to reflect since then?
Of course, obviously, but I think that reflection continues as well with the campaign review. I think the Australian election studies out from ANU will be particularly important this year, because they're normally, they're a very good guide to what actually happened in an election.
That's excellent.
They dig down deep, and they always have some insights. I'll be interested to read that. I think the truthful answer is, Stephen, more than one thing went wrong. It was obviously a devastating result for us, mainly because, there are millions of Australians relying on us to produce a better government, the government that this country deserves, which it hasn't been getting and is not getting now. I think that the more time goes on, the more we realise that there were things which maybe we knew at the time, but maybe we didn't, as a party, quite gauge the significance of. And it's different things in different areas. So, cultural issues were important in some parts of Australia, where I come from. Issues of religious freedom, and the Israel Folau thing blowing up during the campaign, some sort of overflow from marriage equality. For example, I voted for marriage equality in the Parliament. My electorate voted against it. I knew at the time that would have a certain political backlash to it, of course, and where we saw swings against us in Western Sydney across the board. Every sitting MP, Labor MP, had swings against them. And I think that was an issue, particularly in Western Sydney, which it wouldn't have been in other parts of Australia. Obviously, in Queensland, there were particular issues which you've discussed. The pretty destructive, Bob Brown, Greens cavalcade. I'm not in the business of blaming other people, but you've got to call out factors when you see them. That was an insult to people of Queensland, and they voted accordingly, or they saw it as an insult, and they said, "Well, we'll just stick with the LNP. Thanks very much." Yeah. Of course, we had a big, bold policy agenda, and I don't walk away from the controversy that engaged. But I think it would be, disingenuous to think, all Labor needs is a small target strategy and we'll be fine. That is not the answer to our problems. Now, there'll be a review. The shadow cabinet will reach views about what policies we take to the next election. No party takes the same policies to one election, as the next one.
And in the case of the Liberal Party, they don't take any policies.
They don't take any policies, and that'll come back to haunt them. At some point, people say, "What's the point of this government?" And when they do try and do something, if they do, we'll be correctly pointing out they don't have a mandate. They didn't take the Australian people near their confidence. We did, so we would have had a mandate, and we'll go through that process. And I'm not defensive about the policies we took to the election. Things will need to be amended, adapted in light of new circumstances, etc., etc. But I do know that the answer for Labor is not to pretend that we don't have an agenda, and nobody would. I don't think anybody's really seriously suggesting that is the answer.
Speaking of policies, obviously the policies under the previous shortened Labor team, namely franking credits, negative gearing, came in for some criticism in the aftermath. Monday's experts after the loss, and you said yourself you welcome a review into all policies and the campaign strategies that we took, and the review will do that. But without wanting to relitigate the support of those policies for yourself or on behalf of the team of that previous term, I think it's worthwhile having a conversation about. Let's go back to the Abbott government's first budget, in which they slashed everything, and famously said no cuts to the ABC, no cuts to SBS, no cuts to health, no cuts to education, and then just went crazy, which was, as you know, not received very well in the population. And so Labor took a decision to go, right, we are going to restore that. Tell me how a Labor government, if it can't look for things like franking credits or negative gearing and ways to find revenue, how are Labor governments going to find revenue to support the things that are important to not just Labor supporters, but the wider public?
Well, that's the point, Stephen. I mean, the Labor will always have, or should always have, and will always have, a strong agenda in health and education and infrastructure and the things that we're in politics to invest in, right? Now, the choice, therefore, is do you run bigger deficits or, have a worse bottom line than the government? Well, we did that in 2016. We lost an election then, and I think that was a material factor in losing that 2016 election. We had a significantly worse bottom line than the government. Yep. We didn't do that in 2019. We had a better bottom line than the government because of our measures. We went to the election unusually for a party of the left with a better set of budget books. And, I remember Paul Kelly. I mean, again, you talk about, Monday morning quarterbacks. Paul Kelly, the screaming headline in The Australian, Labor's budget numbers, when Jim Chalmers and I released our budget bottom line, Labor's budget numbers show they're ready to govern. I mean, you don't get those headlines in The Australian. No. If you're a Labor shadow treasurer, Labor shadow finance minister, it doesn't happen.
No, and not Paul Kelly in his twilight years either.
No. And so, and every time we announced one of those policies, our poll numbers went up or, stayed the same. We certainly didn't take hits. Yep. And we won by-elections. So it would be wrong, I think. Again, I'm not defensive about the policy agenda. People can, there's legitimate debates to be had about whether we got everything right or, what we could have done differently. But it would just be wrong to say, all we've got to do is kill those economic policies and we're fine. That's just not the case. We've still got to have an agenda in health, education, and social security, infrastructure. The numbers have to add up. And also, as you said, there were plenty of support out there for those policies. And, I guess we'll come to it, but if you look at the analysis, we got swings to us in areas where those policies impacted heavily. So where there were high concentrations of wealthy retirees and landlords, etc., we got swings to us. We got swings away from us in traditional working class areas for the people we were trying to help. I have some views about that, about how that might have happened. Again, that should be seen in the international circumstance, because while we were, I would say none of us were arrogant, none of us were hubristic, but most of us thought we were going to win because that's what all the evidence pointed to. And the Liberals thought we were going to win, and the commentariat thought we were going to win, and that's where all the evidence pointed. So on that degree, everybody's surprised. On another level, though, in hindsight, we shouldn't be that surprised. Hillary Clinton was meant to beat Donald Trump, and working class areas whom her policies were designed to help voted against her, swung away and voted for Trump. Brexit was meant to fail. Working class areas voted for Brexit. Even the 2017 UK election, where you're right, Corbyn did better than most people expected. Even in that election, if you look closely at the results, the Tories polled 44% of the working class vote, and Labor polled 42%.
And Labor was winning seats like Kensington.
Labor won seats of high socioeconomic status, but actually lost support amongst the traditional working class voting base. 60% of the people who had previously voted for UKIP swung to the Conservatives. Labor picked up 18% of that vote. So I think there's a whole lot of cultural issues and identity issues going on there, as well as economic issues, which parties of the left have to grapple with. And I think we had some of those issues in this campaign, religious issues, where we've seen, frankly, to have fallen out of touch with people of faith. Now, I see that as an opportunity as well as a challenge, because a lot of people of faith are socially progressive, believe social justice teachings are very important to who they are, but also feel that the Labor Party has somehow lost respect for people of faith. We have to fix that going forward, and it's an opportunity as well as a challenge.
Do you think that?
I can understand why people would say that. Again, I don't resolve from my vote for marriage equality. It was the right thing to do. I believe in it. And many of my constituents, for example, said, okay, we've come to terms with marriage equality. We didn't vote for it, come to terms with it, etc. But we want to know that the Labor Party is going to listen to us going forward. At least we've got a seat at the table, that our views just won't be dismissed as religious bigotry. We've previously voted Labor. We're socially progressive, but we have some religious views, and we don't want them dismissed. And we feel the Labor Party too often dismisses them. So it's not just about the outcome of the policies, it's about the process and the sort of, if you like, the spirit of the debate, and the respect that we show people. And I think even if we think we're showing respect, we've got to just think about how it's whatever we say or do is perceived amongst communities of faith, regardless of what faith it is. I represent a very religious electorate, frankly, Catholic, Orthodox, electorate, and these are people who traditionally have voted for me consistently, but do say we want to know that there's a place for us in the Labor Party.
Which is fascinating. David Fenn used to tell me years ago, he said, Stephen, before we had good data to analyse, and we were basically kind of guessing on a map where our base was, he used to use the grouping of, if you're migrant, if you're working class and you're Catholic, that's basically, if you can find those people, that's where the Labor base is. You've just mentioned two groups here, both migrants and Catholics, or people of faith, that we are now finding it hard to communicate with or be able to convince them to get support from them, where 20 years ago, that was our base.
Yes, exactly. And so I think that's what we have to, again, we're not the only party grappling with it around the world, but it's a real live issue for us, in my view. And I find it difficult to imagine Labor forming, a stable governing majority without the majority of those people voting with us.
I was going to ask you a question later on, but let's do it now. And I think I've asked this. This may have accidentally developed to be a thematic question of this podcast, particularly because it's called Socially Democratic. But I found myself constantly asking people about the social democratic experiment, or the coalition that is that make up social democratic parties and their base. So I'm really keen to get your thoughts on that. And I wondered if we could maybe unpack in Australia, because I think social democratic parties all around the world have some commonalities, but there's some uniquenesses to them as well.
Of course, sure.
The Democratic Party in the United States, I would argue, is not a social democratic party, but we'll leave them to one side for a moment. But in Australia, the coalition that is historically the Labor Party, I would, and I want you to jump here and tell me if you think I'm wrong, or add other groups in there. There's that long-term Labor blue-collar worker that is part of that working class group. There's that small business blue-collar by definition, but they're probably middle class.
Yep.
So they probably were working class, but they've got a qualified trade, and they're now running their own business.
And so they feel that perhaps they've moved more into the Liberal Party.
Perhaps.
Column.
Yep.
And
And
so
they would have probably been defined as the Howard Battlers in the mid-90s to mid-2000s. That socially progressive 1970s or Whitlamites that came across, the academic left. which are predominantly middle class.
Yep.
And we're kind of losing a bit of that to the Greens.
Yep.
Am I missing anyone else? I have one other group I want to throw in there that could be contentious, and I think we're starting to see it a little bit more now, and that is that upper middle class, small L liberal, that I think that the only value connection that we have with them would be on climate and...
refugees.
Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, they're a funny group because they could vote three ways. They could vote for us, the Liberals, or the Greens.
Correct.
You know, because it depends on what is pushing their buttons at any particular time. There are elements of all our sort of values, policies, which would appeal. I mean, because a lot of those people would be economically conservative, quite wealthy. The tax system quite suits them, but they're quite socially aware. They tend not to live in seats that we hold safely. They're sort of more inner city or inner ring.
It's the group that Andrew Lee was talking about, I think, and got a bit of shit for his sort of thoughts on that. And I kind of felt like saying at the time, just hold on. I think we're in a space right now where we should be allowed to share.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. And look, Andrew was talking about us as a small L Liberal Party, but I think he got misinterpreted because I also think there's a stream there which we can appeal to, which is the traditional liberalism is about individual rights, only the rights of the individual. But we have a more nuanced view, which is you don't have many rights if you're poor. You can't grow. It's all very well having the right to free speech. That's important, all that sort of stuff. But the right to grow to your full potential, to be educated, to have your future invested in, to have good healthcare, is determined by your wealth. And so, if you are going to talk about the value of the individual, let's look at it holistically, which leads you to our point of view. Okay, so. Whereas opposed to the sort of sterile style, traditional small L liberalism, which is all that counts is everybody has equal rights, and if you fall behind at school because your parents are poor, well, that's just the system. Well, that's not acceptable to us as a party of social justice. I think that's what Andrew was talking about. And that's I think you've got that coalition pretty right, and it's a broad church.
It is
pretty hard to keep together from time to time.
And that's the point I want to go to now is how do we keep all of those, because they're constantly leaking out of the tent.
Yep.
And I fear that our church is getting too narrow.
It's getting squeezed on the right and the left, right? Because the Liberals sort of do have to worry about One Nation a bit, but we have to worry about the Greens and the Liberals and One Nation, and basically, we're surrounded. I'm an optimist,
Good.
We'll have to be, right?
I'm glad to hear that.
We have to be. I think the other thing to think about, the other sort of prism to think about this is perhaps the best way I've heard it described is there's a book which I'd recommend called The Road to Somewhere. It's a relatively recent book. It's British. It's in the British context, but it applies equally to us. It's by a guy called David Goodhart. It's Road to Somewhere. And he has broken the electorate down into two parts. It's a bit, he admits, it's a bit rough and ready, but, it's as good a description as I've heard. He calls them the anywheres and the somewheres. Now, the anywheres are people who, many of us could be. We're people who could live anywhere, we could make a living, in America or Britain, or we could pick up tomorrow if we chose to, and, we could do well, and we've sort of got a cosmopolitan, outward-looking approach. We're socially progressive. We're sort of smaller liberals. Yeah. And then there's the somewheres who, where they live is really important to them, and their sovereignty of their nation is important to them, and their culture is important to them, and they don't sort of see themselves as somebody who could pick up stumps tomorrow and move to another country or indeed another state potentially. And now these are good people who, traditionally many of them would be Labor voters who feel that. It's sort of when I think Theresa May was trying to appeal to them. Remember in her first speech as Prime Minister, she said, "If you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere." She got that to some degree, and she was trying to appeal to those people. And this is where we sort of get into the cultural arguments, which parties of the left traditionally aren't good at, because we're used to, we're sort of a creature of the left-right divide, right? You're left if you're economically progressive, you're right if you're economically conservative. We're not used to fighting on the cultural territory, what it means to be an Australian, or the cultural values, or tough borders, etc. Traditionally, it's not a comfortable place for us.
Yeah. Is that because ultimately we're internationalists?
Yeah, partly. Yeah, and we sort of see things through a broader prism. And I have this debate sometimes with people about whether it's refugees or something. I get people berating me for the Labor Party's not strong enough on refugees, and I say to them with great respect sometimes, have you met a refugee? In my community, we live and breathe it every day. We settle more refugees than any other area in the country. I mean, my electorate office, big part of my job is helping settle new refugees, and the community comes together, and schools with a great effort, etc. But when I get people saying we're too tough on refugees, it's not people from my community. It's people from communities who just don't settle refugees and don't have anything to do with refugees, etc. So I think that's part of the... it's only one subset of it, but it's part of the broader debate about somewheres and anywheres. Vernon Bogdanor calls them the exam passing classes, sort of the anywheres, the people who are socially mobile may have come from the wrong side of the tracks, come from the working class traditionally, but thanks to Labor reforms have been there first in the family, to gone to university, have become good income, and maybe now cultural issues are more important to them than economic. There's sort of that doctor's wives, small L Liberal that you were talking about before, who could vote Labor, or could vote Liberal, or could vote Green. There's sort of a mixture. So I think that, what I'm sort of getting at, Stephen, is that these cultural issues are important. It's not just about the economics. I'm a former Shadow Treasurer. I'm an economist by trade. I love economics, but we've got to think about our role as a party culturally as well. And just as the British Labor Party has, there's a whole blue Labor debate going on in Britain.
Yeah, Morris Glassman.
Yep. And there's the unfolding Democratic primaries are sort of in their own way getting, there's various candidates on that spectrum. Joe Biden comes from that traditional working class view. Elizabeth Warren would be more of she's economically progressive, but she would be more socially liberal. I won't go through all the candidates, but they're having that debate. I think we are just going to have to be honest in Australia and tackle some of these issues and I'm not saying it changes our values, of course, but we've got to think about, we cannot appear, and this is part of the Queensland problem, condescending to the somewheres. I think if we do that, it's fatal. These are people's legitimate points of view who aren't, believe in tough borders, aren't racist, just believe in immigration control. That's all, and not unreasonably. Or are concerned about job security, and maybe who are concerned about climate change, sure, but also concerned about job security. So I think we have to ensure that our message is about the somewheres, as David Goodhart put it, as well as the anywheres.
And that is, as you talked about Queensland there, and we had a colleague of yours, Senator Anthony Chisholm, on a couple of weeks ago, and his primary topic of conversation was the Carlton Football Club, but secondary was Queensland. And he was speaking about a couple of specific towns in central Queensland that historically had voted Labor. Yep. And in the last 2 or 3 election cycles, we've seen them drift away. And how do we bring them back?
And Chiz and I and Jim Chalmers spent a fair bit of time, the three of us, in those communities over the last 6 years. We had a bit of a travelling roadshow, the three of us. So he was talking about Bowen, great place.
Yeah, it was one named after you right there.
Yeah, that's right. I've got some good pictures on my trip to Bowen, outside the post office and what have you. Mackay, Gladstone, Townsville, we went to Mount Isa, which we held at the state level. Tony McGrady held the state seat of Mount Isa as a Labor Party member for a long time. They haven't held it in more than a decade. So these are areas where, again, I think the big challenge for us there has been, frankly, whether they work in coal-aligned jobs or not, their community considers themselves part of that. But again, that is easy to get wrong, because I found, you listen to Barnaby Joyce, for example, he'll say, we don't believe in renewable energy in Queensland or in the bush. That's just not true. I found strong support for renewable energy in Mount Isa and elsewhere. But they also want to know that there's going to be a future for their communities, and that there's going to be jobs created in their communities. And again, I think that's a communications challenge as well as a matter of substance for us. These are people whom we do as a political movement. We're in it for them. Yeah. But they don't always see it that way, and we've got to make sure. The old saying, if all the if they only hear us talking about one thing, they'll think that's all we care about.
Yeah.
You know, if they only hear us talk about whether it's inequality or social issues, etc., they think, well, they don't care about our jobs, they don't care about the traditional economy, they don't care about regional Australia. Well, of course we do. So we've got to make sure we're talking about it as much as we're talking about issues that are important to those other parts of our governing coalition, or what we want to be our governing coalition.
Yeah, and the issue of Adani just hung around like a bad smell throughout the life of the campaign.
Yeah, and it was, look, to be fair, it was difficult for both sides. It was difficult for the Liberals. At one point it looked like it was more difficult for them than us, because they were in trouble in Kooyong and, you know, various seats down here. And, you know, it is a big divide. I mean, I always knew when I was doing a Labor Party event in Melbourne, because the first question I'd get was Adani.
Oh, I know, but I mean, you're right. I mean, you drive around Melbourne and those big posters all through the northern suburbs, stop Labor's Adani mine.
Yep. And that's the Greens doing the ultimate wedge.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you go to Queensland and they say, we want to know where's jobs coming from. There's jobs in this Adani mine, and our youth unemployment rate's got a 2 in front of it, and not in a good way. It's got it's a double-digit figure with a 2 in front of it. And
as much as it shits me off, you kind of got to tip your hat to the Greens for managing to make a mine that is, you know, literally Europe away.
Yep.
In terms of distance, and one of the major issues for local politics in the inner city of Melbourne.
And it also became iconic. And, you know, I tried to have sort of rational conversation with people, because, you know, the mine started very big and then got reduced, and we were always saying, well, it probably won't stack up, and the big one didn't. Yeah. And then they reduced the size, and then you'd say to, you know, an audience in Melbourne, for example, where it was a big issue, well, you know, there's a bigger mine down the road. You know, it's like, you know, it is nowhere near the biggest coal mine that's going to be open in Australia. But, the Greens very successfully made it an iconic issue, and also made it about climate change. Well, you know, we went to the election with a very good climate change policy, very progressive, brave, ambitious climate change policy. But they seem to make it, well, if you're for Adani, even if it stacks up on the environmental approvals and there's no government money, and, you know, our position is no government money, it's got to stack up its own merits, which I think is a perfectly sustainable position. Then you somehow, you don't believe in strong action on climate change, which of course was complete nonsense. Complete nonsense. And look, it was a difficult issue for us. I think Joel Fitzgibbons made the point that we said it's got to stack up environmentally and financially, but we didn't make the final point. If it does, then it should go ahead, which I think Joel makes a valid point. You know, and at some point you just got to accept that you're not going to please everybody. Yeah. You know, it's just impossible. It can't be all things to all people, and you're just going to have to make a call. You should work on the merits, and then you know, and then cater the politics after that.
Although I think a lot of Labor Party people are asking the question when it comes to climate change, that how do we successfully communicate climate change to electorates where jobs are the number one priority? Yep. I think we all know that the values frame has to be that if we look after the environment, we're going to look after the economy. But it's easier said than done. One example of it I thought was interesting was whether people are in favour or against fracking, but this anti-fracking campaign that happened down in the sort of just outside Geelong in the first term of the Andrews government. What I found interesting about that campaign was it was a coalition between unlikely groups that would normally not vote for the same political party. It was residents in the sort of rural towns, like small rural towns like Morak that don't vote Labor, farmers who traditionally vote obviously for the Country Party, the Nationals, and environmentalists and conservationists. And together they kind of got together and said, we are worried, let's look at the science, we're worried about the impact that fracking will have on the water table, it's going to impact us from an environmental perspective, but the farmers were like, well, it's going to actually stuff our businesses. So they came out strongly against it, lobbied the state government had a moratorium on it, then finally said, okay, right, that's it, we'll put a ban on fracking in Victoria. So success there. Whether you're in favour of it or not, what I found was interesting, there kind of was an economic argument coupled with a sustainability argument around that. And I think the same can be said for jobs in Queensland if we can somehow build these coalitions between, I'm not talking about the radical hard left that just won't listen to any argument around the jobs in coal and how we can slowly move towards sustainability because they want it now, but there has to be a pathway through there.
There is, and perhaps it's closer than we think. I mean, you know, we're hard on ourselves because we lost the election, we lost very badly in Queensland, and Adani, I think, was the key issue in Queensland. Having said that, I mean, our position was actually the same as the Palaszczuk Labor government, and they won a state election. And that position was, no government money, but if it stacks up, it stacks up. Basically, they put it slightly differently, but they managed to win. They won seats in Central and North Queensland. They won seats in Brisbane. And it worked for them. We had a very similar position, and it didn't work for us.
So is it just a shit comm strategy?
Well, I think we had campaign issues. I think that and I'm not being critical of anyone. We was working really hard, etc. I think, in fairness to our campaign, I didn't predict, and I don't think any reasonable person could really predict the impact of Clive Palmer. He was spending millions and millions, 50 million at least, and it really wasn't hurting us, or we weren't worried about it while he was saying vote one Clive Palmer, because nobody was listening, because he was pretty clearly a charlatan and he wasn't, and it wasn't working. But when he trained all that money just on us for the last fortnight, particularly in Queensland, it hurt. And he lied. He didn't care. It was just it was about Chinese bases or, completely misrepresenting our policies, $1 trillion worth of taxes. I mean, we had a pretty aggressive revenue raising policy, but it wasn't $1 trillion. But he just made stuff up, and he didn't care. And when you put millions and millions and millions behind it, it's going to make a difference. It only has to impact on 1% of the vote, and it did. And it was a big factor in us losing. And the other thing, of course, was the death tax. I always thought it was ironic that we had so many taxes, apparently, but they had to make one up as their big attack. And, anecdotally, that I found that I got that more on the polling booths than any other of our real policies.
That's interesting.
And it was harder in some ways because when if somebody spoke to you about franking credits or negative gearing, and you explain to them, look, you're a pensioner, so you're exempt, or negative gearing, it's all grandfathered existing investments exempt, they'd say, oh, okay, then, all right, I hadn't picked that up in the debate. And that sounds sensible. When you said to them, no, there is no death tax, it doesn't exist, it's a fabrication, they just didn't believe us. They'd seen it on Facebook and they thought, oh, you're denying it. But, I read it on Facebook, that must be true. It was a lot harder to deal with. It was like a puff of smoke as opposed to the real policies where you could explain them. You can't explain a death tax or inheritance tax because there wasn't a policy. And when you said to them, it's a complete fabrication, it's a Liberal Party invention, you just sort of knew you weren't getting through to them. And we have to have a good look at our social media and how we handle these these fake campaigns. We had a discussion on our our morning hookup, every day 6 a.m. hookup. Do we tackle this death tax? We all unanimously agreed we have to. We can't ignore it. So we tackled it. Then the Liberals ran an ad saying, why is the Labor Party talking about a death tax? Pictures of me and Bill saying death tax. And of course the full transcript of what we're saying is there is no death tax, there will be no death tax, it's never been considered. But it just gave them an opportunity to run an ad. Now, it's still the right thing to do, tackle it. Yeah.
It's that hard question, is it, do you repeat the charge?
Yeah. And we took the decision to repeat it. That was our unanimous view. And I think, again, I'd stand by that decision because if we just let it go, we'd be now saying, oh, geez, why don't we go out and say there is no death tax? But there was no right answer to that. So, again, this comes back to my view that there was a sort of tableau of reasons why we came second. The defeat was quite narrow in sort of numbers terms, but just devastating in terms of expectations terms.
Yeah. And they are, nothing, the dial really didn't move much between 2016 and 2019.
No, it didn't. A couple of seats here and there, both ways. The percentage of the vote was very similar, etc. And 2016 it's all about expectations. 2016 was seen as an unexpected, almost triumph. Of course, we were expected to get whacked by Malcolm Turnbull, and 2019 is a devastating defeat because everybody thought we'd win. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's move on to some other topics that I wanted to talk to you about. One of them was New South Wales Labor has been in the media a little bit lately, and my question's more broader than actually the specifics. I don't want you to sort of get sort of stuck into the details, but without doing sort of any humble bragging, Victorians in the Labor Party feel like we're in a very unique position right now because we're regarded as the leader in policy development in campaigns. Melbourne's about to become the world's biggest city in the country, and I want to get a sense.
Sydney team's going to win the premiership.
Well,
Greater Western Sydney Giants.
We will be talking about that in a moment. Don't worry. But in all seriousness, by the time you have an election in New South Wales again, it's going to be more than a decade that the Conservatives have been in power, which is a very, very unique piece of historical fact. And I actually went back to look at if that had ever happened before.
Askin.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, 65 to 76, that was last time.
Yeah. So otherwise, New South Wales Labor has been, without using a monarchist term, it has been the jewel in some sort of, socialist crown, if there was such a thing. For a very, very long time.
Which is traditionally, as you say, historically the opposite's the case. I mean, the Balti-Hammer governments all through, while we were in office in New South Wales.
We were struggling.
Victoria was the Liberal Party's jewel in the crown, right?
Yeah.
That historical trend's been reversed.
Without getting too nerdy on it, though, do you think that's because you didn't have a split and we did?
That was a big factor, no question about that. One of the great achievements of the New South Wales Labor Party was avoiding a split.
Yep. Who was the bishop that in Sydney that said, no, we're not doing what Mannix did down south? I'm going to test it.
Gilroy.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's right. Cardinal Gilroy. He just said, no, the split's not for us. So that was a big factor. But then, there's all sorts of demographic reasons that have traditionally been identified. And you're right, the Labor Party's strong when we're strong in New South Wales. And, those great Labor governments, ran, Carr, did great things. And we've been out now for 8 years and we'll be 12 at least. And again, in fairness, the Farrell, Baird, Berejiklian government hasn't been the worst government in Australian history. They've been in some senses competent, but they also haven't been fantastic. They haven't done a huge amount. So, look, again, we just have to come back. Now, in fairness, I think for a while there we looked like we were competitive at the state election. People were asking me, my federal colleagues were saying what's going to happen in New South Wales, and I was saying it's too close to call. I can't call it.
For the 2019 campaign?
Yeah. This one just gone. Until the last week. And in the last week I said, we're done. We've had a terrible last week of the campaign. It's all over. We can't win. And that is what it is. But I guess that means the fundamentals weren't too bad. Like we were in with a show. We just failed in the last week. I'm not minimising the size of the defeat or the challenge to come back, because the Liberals hold, not a huge majority, but a comfortable enough majority, and a lot of those seats they hold by good majority, so they're going to be hard to win back in 4 years' time.
Where are geographically, for the non-New South Wales people listening to the podcast, where are those seats?
Oh, look, they're spread around, but, the sort of middle ring. So a seat like East Hills, for example, which is sort of a slightly more affluent area, like the Bankstown region, we should win. We should have won. I mean, it was 0.1%, and we lost it. Again, and the candidate, the Liberal MP had been bundled out for corruption, and they still managed to hold it. So that's an obvious example. Seats like Parramatta, which we held all through the Ran years and the Carr years, a relatively safe Liberal seat now in Western Sydney.
For the Tories?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So areas like that are the ones that we've got that we haven't managed to turn back.
Yep. Are there demographic changes happening in
some? So Parramatta is now heavily subcontinental, Indian. Now, we work very hard with that community, but all the evidence would be at the state level they've voted Liberal, but at the federal level we hold that seat. I mean, Julie Owens holds the seat at Parramatta. Obviously, it's bigger than the state seat with slightly different demographics, but the fact that we hold that seat relatively well at the federal level, and they hold it relatively well at the state level, I guess shows this on one level that there is hope. They are prepared to vote Labor. They just have not been voting Labor at the state level. So, the state team, I'm close to many of them, had their work cut out. Again, at the state level, it's about health and education, which should be good for us, right? It's in New South Wales, we've had a long legacy of getting over the sort of the stench of the last few years of the government. Eddie Obeid being in prison, etc. That's taken a long time. The fraction of time will partly deal with that, and the people have been right to criticise us over that. We made some mistakes with the Obeid situation, but every election it just is more and more distant history.
Yeah. Let's jump on an aeroplane and fly back in time and also to the United States at the same time. So technically it would be a DeLorean. You're a bit of a... I ran into a former staffer of yours during the week. I won't say his full name. Let's just call him Bill. And I mentioned that I had you on the podcast this week, and I was talking about some things we should talk about. And he said, he's a massive politics nerd, particularly for older sort of political campaigns and particularly presidencies. And he said, you need to ask him about LBJ.
Oh, right. Thanks, Bill.
I wonder if you could comment on how you would define the presidency of LBJ.
Look, I find the LBJ presidency fascinating. I've read basically all there is to read about it, because he was such a bad man doing such good things. You know, he was a bastard to work for. You know, the famous stories about how he treated people, called staff into the toilet when he was sitting on the toilet to bark instructions at them. And, you know,
which was a famous scene in that that film.
It was a great movie.
Was it Woody Harrelson playing?
Yeah, he did it brilliantly. And that movie's based on the Robert Caro books, which are brilliant.
Yeah.
Of course, there's 4 out now.
And there's one more to come?
There's at least one more to come, and we're all, hang on bated breath. Without putting too fine a point on it, he's been writing them for 40 years, and he's an old man now. And
he's like the political version of George R. R. Martin.
Yeah, and he took a diversion. He wrote another book about something else, which pissed us all off. Like, where's the 5th book? He wrote a book about writing books, which is a great book, and he's defended himself since, saying,
not a priority right now.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Robert Caro, the LBJ series, is just the finest biographical series you could hope to read. I mean, this guy, Robert Caro, has immersed himself for 40 years in the life of Johnson, picked up his wife and kids and moved themselves to Johnson, Texas, where Johnson lived for the first few years of his life, just to immerse himself in Johnson's early years, and found amazingly. There's always the story of the senatorial race, which was widely regarded, suspected to have been rorted by Johnson. He won, it's where he got the nickname Landslide Lyndon, because he won by 60 votes out of some ridiculous number, and nobody had been able to prove it. And so basically, Caro, this is in the 80s, 40 years later, goes on this mission before the internet to find the returning officer of the election. And finds him, like, I can't remember his name, but whatever his name was, he searches all the people with that name through America, and they all say, no, that's not me, you've got the wrong bloke. And eventually he knocks on a caravan in California, and says, did you happen to be the returning officer? He says, yes. He says, would you be willing to tell me the story about, how that election was effectively rorted? He said, I've never spoken about that to a living soul, but I'm dying of cancer. I don't have long to live, so I might as well tell the story to somebody.
Ripper. Good.
Yeah. So it's just compelling reading. And then, he joins the Senate and he gets taken having been under the wing of Sam Rayburn in the House, he gets under the wing of Richard Russell of Georgia. And so the book introduces Richard Russell of Georgia, and 100 pages of backstory of Richard Russell of Georgia before he even meets Lyndon Johnson.
That's good.
It's great. So and that was such an era of social change, and I mean, he held the coalition together. Eventually, obviously, Nixon took the southern states off him, but off the Democrats. But when Johnson managed to introduce the Civil Rights Act, it was very hard. But again, he knew his constituencies, and he'd been anti-civil rights reform as a congressman and senator, but as president delivered it. A remarkable turnaround. It was amazing, despite all his, as I said, such a bad man, and you can't conceive of working for him, but he also brought out the best of people in many ways. So I find it a fascinating presidency.
Do you think that his presidency lived in the shadow of that bloke on the wall there, JFK?
Well, he certainly thought so.
Yeah.
And that drove him, yes. So he maybe famously, but I find it fascinating. He was obsessed by that.
He hated the Kennedys.
Hated Robert in particular.
Yeah.
I don't think you could necessarily say he hated John, but he did hate Robert, and Robert hated him. There was this dance where Robert was his Attorney General after he'd been JFK's Attorney General, and then there was a lot of pressure on LBJ to name Bobby as his running mate as Vice President, which he was just absolutely determined not to do. Came up with this formula to say no serving member of the cabinet will be my Vice President, because RFK happened to be a serving member of the cabinet, all this stuff, and was, obsessed. And then for a while was obsessed with Teddy, and was driven by it. But it went to all the Kennedy staffers, in the days after the assassination, and said, "I need you more than he did. I need you to stay. He didn't need you. He was good enough. I'm not good enough. I need you. You need to stay with me. We need to finish the project."
That's interesting. Isn't it?
Gave the big "We shall continue" speech.
Yep.
And just harnessed the energy of the Kennedy years. And arguably, who knows, but arguably more effective than JFK would have done. We got stuff through the Senate which maybe JFK would have failed at because he knew the institution.
Yeah, and I'm a Irish Catholic background. I'm a massive Kennedy fan, but even I have to admit that having read stuff on LBJ, he certainly was a far more pragmatic,
effective,
ruthless operator.
Understood how the Democratic Party worked better than JFK did.
Wasn't that northern liberal,
Nope.
And in the end, really, I know that Kennedy's career was cut short, but Johnson delivered far more on civil rights.
Yeah.
Two major pieces of legislation, the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act.
Well, look, if Johnson hadn't got himself caught up in Vietnam, he would be remembered as one of the great transformative presidents.
Yeah.
Of course, Kennedy started the Vietnam commitment, but Johnson took it to a whole new level and made massive mistakes. But if he was looked at as purely as a domestic president, he'd be in the pantheon of FDR and Lincoln and
he's completely redefined the modern Democratic Party.
Yeah,
just through those two pieces of law.
Yeah, that's right. But
so you think Vietnam is the thing that sort of hangs around his head?
I think it wasn't for. I think Vietnam has poisoned his legacy.
A bit like Iraq for Blair.
Correct, absolutely. If Blair was remembered as a domestic prime minister, great achievements to his name. Massive investments in health and education, etc., etc. But then had a blind spot on Iraq. And if we're talking about book recommendations, one of the best. I love British political books as well, but I love British political diaries. The British politicians do diaries better than anybody else, far better than the Americans, better than us. So there's a genre of diaries. But there's a particular diary of a guy who was only ever a most junior minister in the Blair government called Chris Mullins. He's written diaries in 3 volumes. Sounds boring, right? Absolutely compelling reading. Absolutely. And he was actually, the best part of the diaries was there was a time when he wasn't a minister, but he was like the backbench liaison to Blair. Like they had a committee where Blair would bring in, representatives of the backbench and talk to them about how the government's going. And it's fascinating to read the Mullins diaries. Mullins and others are saying to Blair, "Don't do it. This government's going well. Why are we signing over foreign and defence policy to George W. Bush? Don't do it." And Blair just had this obsession, almost a religious-like zeal to say this is our responsibility, etc. And again, if it wasn't for Iraq, Blair would be remembered as one of the great transformative British prime ministers. But Iraq hangs around his legacy. Mullins interestingly wrote The Very British Coup before he went into Parliament.
Right.
And then ended up as a Labourer, sort of a left-leaning Labourer MP.
Yeah, for some reason his name rings a bell. I don't know. Where was it? What was his constituency? Where was he from?
It was up north. It was in Sunderland.
Right.
And you probably have come across him as the author of The Very British Coup, which of course was made into a movie.
Yep.
Movie, not a miniseries. Or maybe it was a miniseries, but anyway, it was like a movie length. And a novel, and then he's written, I think, probably the finest set of British political diaries amongst a very high bar. Beating Alan Clark and Chips Channon and all those guys. Really, really worth reading. So
this podcast has now turned into not just a podcast recommendation, but also a book recommendation.
You're welcome.
I went and saw a documentary for the Melbourne Film Festival on Nixon. Have you heard about this documentary? It goes for 5 hours.
All right. No, I haven't heard of it, no.
And
I love Nixon too. I love reading about Nixon.
Yeah. It was either the most comprehensive documentary ever made in the history of modern cinema, or it was the most self-indulgent experience for a movie director to try and make an audience sit through 5 hours.
And you sat through all 5 hours?
Yeah, I did. Look, I actually I nicked out at one point to have a toilet stop and grab a beer because I was getting a bit weary. But it was comprehensive, and it should be for 5 hours.
Yeah.
If it comes to, I don't know when the Sydney Film Festival is on, but if that's already passed, but I imagine that's when it's going to
look out for it all.
That will get the airing there. It was almost like it was like a marathon. Well, actually, no, it was longer than a marathon because a marathon normally is between 2 and 4 hours. This was 5 hours, and people were dropping off. And I was proud to say I stayed till the end. But look, watching it, I couldn't help but think about the context that we're in right now with the United States and Donald Trump. And I feel like at the end of the day on the Nixon journey that the American democratic institutions and the Constitution won out and it survived. But it's almost like as if Trump's saying, give me 8 years and I reckon I can put that through the ringer and test it. Where are your thoughts on this Trump administration and the pillars that define the American democracy?
If I was a Democrat in the United States, which I would be, obviously, if I was a United States citizen, which I'm not for any high court judges who are listening, I would not support impeachment. I would support defeat of the Republicans at the ballot box because I think, unlike Nixon, who very clearly Republicans had decided his presidency was over, that's not the way it would pan out with Trump. And frankly, you'd make a martyr of Trump, and he would, for years, hang around as a guy who had the presidency taken off him through, they would assert conspiracies, etc. I think the key for the Democratic Party is to choose the best candidate, to coalesce behind that candidate as quickly as possible once one of them has a clear majority, and to win at the ballot box. I think that's the best. Whether they can pull that off or not, everybody's got their views. Some people say Trump's home. Some people say, less people say Trump is going to lose. I say, who knows? Anything could happen. I mean, I didn't think Trump would become president, so don't listen to me.
When I was in New York, we were over there with a group of mates on our Aussies for Hillary Caravan of Courage, and I got interviewed by ABC Radio with the Washington correspondent over there. On the steps of St. Pat's Cathedral, and she sort of said to me at the end, Stephen, on air, who do you think's going to win? And I was like, Hillary's got a shit in it, that was the day before the election. Yeah,
well, again, this is I guess back where we started. This is my point about our election result. Is on one level we're surprised. We shouldn't be because this is what's happening around the world.
Yeah,
the left's getting beaten unexpectedly at the last minute.
James Carville was on, actually you would have heard it, because he was on the Axe Files, which I love, the Raging Cajun. I don't know what your thoughts are on. Yes, great. So we're simpatico on that. And he said that he thought that there were lessons to be learned out of the Hillary campaign, that they kind of started to fix them going into the midterms, and since then, they're making all the same mistakes again. And I think he was kind of having a crack at AOC and that kind of newer caucus coming in.
Well, he probably was, although he did interestingly say he wouldn't vote for Biden. Which I thought was a big call from him.
Well, he basically said, I'm just not going to vote for someone who's 83 years of age.
Well, he had the way, I remember him saying this, it was interesting. He said, because he's 70-something, the Raging Cajun now, and he said, listen, I used to, when I'm giving a speech on the West Coast, and they're saying, well, you give a speech at this conference and, they'll fly you over. I used to insist that I get flown over the day before. Now I'm so old, I need to be flown over the day before. He said, and if you can't have a president that old. That was his view.
Yeah. Which kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah. And he sort of indicated he hadn't made up his mind, but he was leaning towards voting for Pete Buttigieg, who's a pretty attractive candidate, I must say. And, sure, he's mayor of South Bend, Indiana, isn't the traditional qualification to be president, but neither is being host of The Apprentice. The rules of the rule book's sort of being torn up.
And 8 years ago, they were saying that a junior senator with a funny name from Illinois can't be a president.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. He served, for 3 minutes in the Senate and then was president. So I do think it plays to consider tearing up the playbook a bit and taking some risks.
Yeah. I find myself leaning on either Mayor Pete or Cory Booker. I just don't understand why. I keep on going off Cory Booker, and then I read about him, or I just sort of read some of the stuff he's doing, or hear him on a podcast, and I come back again and go,
yeah, I think he's fine. I read his book, Cory Booker's book. I mean, they all write these sort of very formulaic sort of presidential campaign autobiographies, but he's for the genre was pretty good. Again, I mean, I think he's got some attractiveness. I think I would be attracted to going for change and, voting for something which is a bit different.
Yeah.
He ticks some of those boxes. Kamala Harris ticks some boxes. Mayor Pete ticks some boxes. But O'Rourke ticks some boxes.
He's really been coming for a lot of criticism, hasn't he? Sort of.
Well, his campaign's gone nowhere, hasn't it? From almost beating Ted Cruz for the Senate spot to his presidential campaign, just really has just sort of.
I think people are saying it's a bit light on in substance, whereas the complete contrast to that is obviously Elizabeth Warren,
who's got a policy for everything.
Yeah, he's the other side of it, and his campaign has tried to beef that up a bit.
Yeah.
And obviously the events in the shootings in El Paso, and that's been something where he can grab the attention of the media again. It'll be interesting to see how his poll numbers go in the next round.
Yes.
But he's still just not. He's in that 3%.
No, he hasn't cut through to that top echelon when he announced he was like the real deal. So, campaigns are funny things, aren't they? They sort out the wheat from the chaff.
Final couple of questions. Great at Western Sydney. I don't follow footy at all, but it is final season. I know you are a massive GWS fan.
Yes.
I do understand that you guys are in the finals this year.
Yes.
You've got Footscray or Western?
Footscray.
Footscray.
Bulldogs,
yeah.
yeah.
Basically, my AFL is through the prism of anything from 1982 to 1995.
Okay.
So I didn't even realise there was a team called Greater Western Sydney until a couple of weeks ago. I'm only joking. So you guys are in the finals. How are you feeling? Confident?
Look, I always tip the Giants because the year I win the tipping competition will be the year that we win the grand final because, too loyal to tip against them. We'll have some challenges. We've had some injury issues. We sort of had a great season, but we've had a rough patch the last few weeks. We beat Gold Coast Suns, but that's because we got on the plane and turned up.
And you played the Doggies a couple of weeks before,
yeah,
right?
and they beat us. Yeah, I was there, and it was all pretty devastating.
Was that at home or away?
That was at home.
And you got a home final?
Yes. So look, we're in with the show. The Bulldogs are sort of the sentimental favourites because they're sort of doing a repeat of 2016, coming from behind. Mm-hmm. They're the opposite of us. They've had an ordinary season but finished strong. We had a good season but finished weak. I'd like your Melbourne listeners to cut GWS a bit more slack. We're coming for some criticism, but I think a lot of it's unfair. We're out there having a go in not traditional AFL territory. We've got 30,000 members. We get 10,000 people to a game. We're doing pretty well.
Yep.
And, it's growing footy. And it's good community atmosphere around the club. I go to every home game. I refuse to go to the box.
Good man.
Sit in the grandstand with the other supporters, and it's a good atmosphere. Great club culture. Take my daughter. It's a beautiful environment at Giant Stadium. Kids all get along, and you have no compunction, and then the kids go off. And
what's the? I'm interested to know the type of person that goes along to a GWS game. Are they expat Victorians?
There is some. Yeah, there's a mixture. There's a lot of expat Victorians who've moved to Western Sydney and have adopted the team. There's a lot of us sort of ex-Swans. I think one of the few excuses for changing teams is when a new team comes along for where you live. I was a Swan. And
I think that's the rule. I think that's the only time you can change teams, really, isn't it? Or if your team gets made extinct.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a bunch of us. There's some just complete converts to AFL. When the Giants came along, they came and liked it.
Yep.
So it's a mixture. Yeah.
I think that this sort of binary kind of you can either follow one, you can only follow one code and one code only. It's just ridiculous.
No, it has to be. AFL is my preferred style of football. It's my favourite game. But there's 2 million people that live in Western Sydney, and there's plenty of sport. We can
share it around.
You can be a rugby league, Parramatta supporter and a GWS supporter, and a Western Sydney Wanderers supporter, and different codes.
And there clearly is a thirst for it as well. The Western Sydney Wanderers.
Oh, they're a phenomenon.
Yeah.
That round ball football's not my preferred, but I've been to games and they're very entertaining and they're a good team. Yeah, absolutely, and hope they win.
Yeah. So, predictions against the Doggies this coming.
Well, I've tipped us. I'm hopeful it'll be close. The Doggies go in with a bit of wind behind them. But, we're at home. Jeremy Cameron won the Coleman Medal. He's playing. We've had a bit of injury problems, but some of our good players are back. It was predicted that we'd lose Canelio. He's staying.
Yep.
He was always going to stay for the finals, but just in terms of morale boost, he's staying with the club for another 7 years. So that's pretty good for the esprit de corps around the club. So I reckon we're a shot to beat the Bulldogs. And
if
on.
you do, who do you progress against?
Oh, well, it depends who.
Don't put the mods on you?
Yeah. No, it depends who wins the other games then. Yeah. But I did a tipping sort of bracket thing this morning where I had to predict who'd win the first round and then the second and then the third, and of course it ended up with the Giants winning the grand final. So.
Well, actually, while we're at it, then West Coast Essendon at over in Perth. Who you got there? That's Thursday night.
West Coast.
Geelong, Collingwood.
Yeah, tough one. I my finger hesitated over the tipping because it's a close call. I think I went with Geelong.
That's Friday night, and having checked out of watching this sport, I'm surprised to see Geelong good again because
they've had a ripper of a season,
right? Yeah. And then the other part of the qualifiers is Brisbane and the Tigers, and that's obviously up in Brisbane on Saturday night.
Yeah, Brisbane's sort of they've had a really bad few years, and they've come good to be playing finals football is a great achievement for them. So, yeah, they might pull that off.
So you're thinking, a couple of away teams there potentially could be making in the mix. In fact, the only all-Victorian game is the Geelong.
Correct. Yeah.
Collingwood. Otherwise,
that's right. It's most of it's interstate, and so it's good news for Qantas and Virgin.
Yeah, it is indeed. Good luck with that.
Thank you. Yeah, we've been sort of in the hunt for the grand final for the last few years.
So you're due.
We are due, yes, and it'll be good for football and good for Western Sydney.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you make it to the grand final, the big dance, whoever you're playing against, we'll have to find someone else from the caucus who is a supporter of that team and bring you one, and we can have a bit of a grand final
Well, I've got a
breakdown.
list of people who might take bets out with and send abusive text messages to when we're winning.
Well, Richard Miles obviously is a huge Cats fan, so maybe you might end up against your Victorian colleague.
Well, and Tim Watts is the sort of preeminent bulldog in the caucus.
Yeah, that's true. But he changed teams. He was a Lions fan.
He was, absolutely. But then he did move to Western Melbourne and became an MP.
Can't do it. You just got to stick it out. Stick it out. Chris Bowen, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today.
Great.
It's great to have you back. Keep up the good work in Canberra.
Yeah, thanks. We didn't even get to health. Maybe we'll talk about that
No,
next
we
time.
didn't actually, did we? Well, there's always going to be another podcast.
There'll be another podcast. There's a lot to talk about health. Social determinants of health and how your health is determined by your wealth in Australia is something you'll hear a lot more about in the future. So
Fantastic.
great. Good on you. Thanks for having me on.